In 1989, a couple of friends and I drove from the east coast of America to the west in a week of the Great American Road Trip. So I've seen firsthand how different the two sides of the USA really are. But my guest on this week's episode of Here Comes Pod, Steve Mosko, loves them both, and his incredibly successful career in TV is both an East Side and West Side story. Steve's TV career started out in his hometown of Baltimore and then Philadelphia, but the call of the West was too strong, and he headed to LA and a job at Columbia Pictures. In 2001, he took over leadership of the TV division, and over the next 15 years led a team that produced iconic scripted, daytime, game show and entertainment programming. More recently, he leveraged that experience as CEO of Village Roadshow Entertainment Group. Steve and I talked about his early days in Baltimore and Philly and his appearance in the iconic movie Diner, moving to LA and exploring the TV stations of the West Coast, picking up the pieces of the new Sony Pictures TV business in 2001, and how some of the most iconic shows that he worked on have very slow starts. So today it's not Mosko on the Hudson, it's Mosko on Mosko. Enjoy. Hi Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Danny, good morning from LA, good evening in London. So how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's great to have you on board. And
thank you. Good to be here.
I always like to start with a fun question to get the creative juices flowing. So in this case, I would point out that it's not unknown for real people in the TV business to end up as characters in a US TV show. Blacklist is an example that springs to mind. So if a Steve Mosko character was going to be written into a TV show, which show would you choose and what would be the character's plotline?
Well, I think the answer probably I would have given you maybe a month ago would be different than what I'll give you right now. So I'm actually watching this, started watching this show, The Studio, which is, I gotta be careful what I say. I could see myself kind of the way they're doing it. They haven't really brought the TV coming in and really kind of having an effect on how movies are made or what the role of TV and changing the dynamics of the movie business are. I could see myself in that being like the TV guy that's being a pain in the ass to the film guys. That would be an easy one. The plot line would be very simple. You know, TV used to be the place that most studios would look at and say, yeah, they're making money, but we're making art here on the feature side. And then the quality of TV started improving, and all of a sudden it challenged features not only in its, financial ability, but also its creative ability. So.
Well, it's interesting because that was going to be one of my questions. So I'll jump to that before we go through things more chronologically, because it reminded me that Ben Fritz, who wrote the Big Picture, you probably know it. And he said that by 2015, the TV division at Sony was earning double the profits of movies at Sony, with the film execs regarded as royalty and TV delivering tax revenues from a far-off land. In the past, you've described the film business as the white-collar side of Hollywood and TV as more the blue-collar side of town.
Right.
Is that still the case, or do you think TV's prestige and importance has caught up with film or even overtaken it?
Sure. Well, it's interesting because it used to be that actors that were primarily film actors would only go to TV once their careers were over in the feature film side. It's totally changed now, because I remember when we first started, and you remember this, when we started doing shows for basic cable, the international group, Keith and those guys were like, oh, how are we going to sell these cable shows? And there's only 13 episodes, and I think we all kind of put our heads together and said, okay, if we do a deal with the cable guys, the basic cable guys, all the episodes are going to run. They're going to promote the hell out of it. But we were also going to dip into the acting pool at a different time than when the broadcast networks are doing their pilots. So by doing fewer episodes and knowing the promotion and whatever, we were able to attract people like Glenn Close and William Hurt and really great actors, Michael Chiklis, that were kind of both primarily film actors, but they were thinking about TV. So the fact that it was fewer episodes, but when we were selling, we're saying, look, we're maybe fewer episodes, but they're going to run, and we're going to get like really good talent that typically don't do television. That helped the international sales. So I think it took a while, but I mean, my God, it's like there's, nowadays, like the lines are so blurred between TV and film in terms of because the material's so good on both sides. And if you're an actor, you're an actor. And I think the comment that I made originally at the time about white collar, blue collar, and again, it's hard making movies. It's hard making anything, TV shows, movies, whatever. But when you commit to a TV series, you're committing to doing 13 plus potentially episodes a year. So you got to write 13 episodes, you got to produce 13 episodes, you got to act, or more, and you got to commit to multiple seasons potentially, and you're cranking stuff out. So not blue collar anymore from the sense of how you're viewed, more to the point like the amount of work that's involved in what you get involved in a TV show, because it requires a commitment on a lot of different levels. And again, not suggesting that making films are easier. They're not, because God knows you shoot it, you're in the editing, you're doing all kinds of things, but it's just a different process and different commitment of time and energy and whatever.
From Diner to The Wire, Hairspray to Homicide: Life on the Street, Baltimore has been the setting of many movies and
Sure.
TV shows. How do those fictional versions compare to the city that you knew when you were growing up and where you began work in the TV business at NBC affiliate WMAL?
I love Baltimore. I mean, I have nothing bad to say about Baltimore. I think from a career perspective, I worked in TV for what's now Sinclair Broadcasting. That was my first job in TV at WBFF TV. Then I went to WMAR. It was great. I mean, my dream in life, I mean, was to work in a TV station. That kind of was it when I was a kid. And I thought, man, if I could work at a TV station, I've made it. So I did that at a very early age, but no, it's a great city. I was there, growing up. I grew up in East Baltimore, which is kind of as a kid, that was the blue collar part of town. Then we moved out to a suburb outside of Baltimore. So living there was great, but career wise, as I started working, I realized if I was going to, move through the ranks, I had to leave. So, I still have two sisters that live in Baltimore. We have some family in the surrounding area. My parents have passed away, but I belong to a golf course there, which enables me to kind of connect with my two brothers. One lives in Washington, one lives in New Jersey. So I love going back there and visiting. And it's funny. Growing up, crabs were a big part. Eating blue crabs were a big part of it. Of course, as I got older, I became allergic to shellfish, and I can't even eat crabs. But no, I love going back there. And by the way, it's a little known fact, I was actually in the movie Diner. A friend of mine, a woman by the name of Martha Royal, was a casting director, and she said, "Hey, we need extras for this movie we're shooting." I said, "Okay, I'm in." Well, what I didn't realize, my hair was, I mean, it's a little long now, but my hair was a little longer back then, and they had to cut it, so that didn't make me happy. But I was in three scenes. One was the initial scene at the dance, and then I was behind a bunch of rows behind Mickey Rourke when they had that infamous the woman putting the hand in the popcorn. And then I was in a scene with Timothy Daly and Steve Guttenberg walking in front of the theater, and I was the guy that walked by. But what was funny years later, I mean, at the time I didn't appreciate it because they were all nobodies. But like Daniel Stern, Paul Reiser, Ellen Barkin, Mickey Rourke, Kevin Bacon, Steve Guttenberg, Timothy Daly. I mean, that movie was loaded with future stars. And I got a chance to talk. I talked to, it was one of Barry Levinson's early movies, so I spoke to him a little bit. But no, it was fun. But it became such an iconic film. And then after that, he did Tin Man and Avalon and some other Baltimore based. Anyway, I guess gave you a long-winded way of saying I'm very happy living in Los Angeles, which I love, and we raise our kids. But I enjoy going back to Baltimore visiting. I have a lot of great friends back there, and And there's a lot of us in Los Angeles that are part of that group. So, but yeah, it's nice.
And after WMAR came WTAF, which is a very interesting
Right.
acronym for TV station in the modern world. But
Yep.
you were vice president and station manager there. Um,
Actually, no. So I left Baltimore and went to WTAF. I started as local sales manager and worked my way to general sales manager at WTAF. And then it was owned by Taft Broadcasting, which was a big broadcast and radio company at the time. Dudley Taft was the family member that ran it. He then sold that group and then bought another station in Philadelphia. And then I came over to that and had a small ownership piece and then I ran that station. So I had two moves in Philly, one from WTAF to WPHL TV. We had a lot of sports, and they later became a CW station after I left.
I'm really interested because broadcasting doesn't work in quite the same way in places like the UK. How do you run a successful local TV station, say in the late 80s, and how do you juggle the demands of being part of a network, but also having the local station
Right.
elements?
Well, that's a good question because so when I was at WTAF, I was there when Fox Network started. So we were totally independent for the early part of my stay there, and then we became a Fox affiliate. And it wasn't. I mean, obviously, it's a huge success now, but it wasn't such a slam dunk back then. But to answer your question specifically, it's a very simple answer, which is local, 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 which means you're hanging your hat not so much on I'm a CBS affiliate or NBC affiliate, but like what are you doing to become like the local TV station? So in the case of WTAF, when I was there, we were, and it seems weird today, but we started local newscasts, which the traditional affiliates had news, but the independents in town didn't have newscasts. So we started a 10 o'clock news, which was great, which again made us more local. And we also had the Phillies baseball team, so we carried like 90 Phillies games. We also, when I got there, we made a deal with the Philadelphia Flyers hockey team. So I guess the answer to the question is anything you can do to really make yourself part of the local community, and sports is obviously a big driver of that. You need to do that. And we did other things as well, but it's community involvement, but really becoming the local station. And a lot of that came from sports, carrying sports.
In 1992, you moved to LA, as you mentioned, to
Mhm.
become vice president of the Western region
Yes,
for
correct.
for Columbia TriStar Television Distribution. How did that move come about, and what did the new job entail?
I was working in Baltimore. I loved every minute of it. And I was at WMAR TV as local sales manager. And I got a call from a headhunter to go to Philly and went there. And that was a larger market. So that seemed like a logical move. But I was still kind of in the business of TV stations. And I remember at the time looking at the ratings for the Philadelphia market, and half of the people were watching other, which was cable or whatever. So the audiences were kind of moving away from broadcast TV. And I'm not that smart, but what I recognized was that the real value in the world was content, and there'll be plenty of outlets that are going to distribute this content, but the future, I mean, not the future, but like there was real opportunity and growth in being in the content side. So being an independent station, we were buying a lot of the off-network shows like Married with Children and what have you. So I got to know the people at Sony very well. Also got to know the people at MCA. We bought a lot of programming from them, which is now NBC, which is now Universal. And I remember having breakfast with the guys at MCA, and I said, "Hey, if you have anything opens up, I'd love to consider moving to the West Coast." And I said the same thing to the guys at Sony. So at the time, it was Ed Wilson and Bob Cook. Ed was head of syndication and Bob was head of marketing. And they called me up and said, "Hey, we'd love for you to come out here." So originally, I was talking to them. They didn't have anybody running the ad sales division. So I talked about running. They talked about that, but then they hired another guy, or they've said, "Well, we got this other guy. We're going to do that, but we need somebody to run the West Coast syndication office." So look, what the crazy thing was, people thought I was absolutely nuts to go from owning part of a TV station, running a TV station. I was the head of the ad council. We had beautiful. We had just built a beautiful home in Philly. On it was we were established there. But I personally just felt like I was, and again, this is no reflection of Philadelphia at all. But I had gone as far as I can go career wise in that job, and the idea, and I'd love to work. So the idea of like working 30 years at like doing the same thing just wasn't possible. So when I left and went to Los Angeles to run the West Coast office of syndication, people really thought I was nuts. But my thought was, you know what? I don't want to be the age I am now. I mean, sitting in my rocking chair saying I shoulda, coulda, woulda, And if I fail, I fail. But I was very confident I could succeed. My thought was, if I can get my foot in the front door, opportunity will be there. So I did the West Coast thing. Now, the crazy thing is, luckily, I have a phenomenal wife who I've been married to for 45 years. Who there was a lot on her back because when I came out, I moved out to Los Angeles a couple months ahead of her, and we had two boys at the time. So there was that. And then she moved out there, she's like getting organized with the kids and the house and what have you. And I was on the road every week because in the syndication world, you're traveling city to city. It's going to sound negative, but it's not. You're a door-to-door salesman, so you're going to markets, you're selling in person. This is before Zoom. So thank God she was able to hold down the fort. The real blessing to me was I grew up on the East Coast. I'd never seen the West Coast. So I had this West Coast syndication job, and it was hard, but like I said, got me in the door. And two things came out of that, which I'm grateful for. One is I got a chance to see the western part of the United States, which I'd never seen. So I literally going up the coast, everything west of the Rockies, where I'd never been, and that includes like Phoenix and Albuquerque and San Diego and Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Denver and Colorado Springs and Seattle and Portland. I mean, I saw the West Coast and I fell in love with it. Love Los Angeles, but I got to see something I've always heard about. So there was that. The second thing is, when you were in the old days with the syndication business, you really had to know every aspect. You know this, like how a show is made and who the actors are and why it's being scheduled on the network a certain way, and then where can it run in syndication. So you learn so much about the inner workings of a studio. We sold the movie packages as well. So when you go sell all this stuff, you need to know everything about it. So I really got a master's degree in like what goes on in a studio and how you make money. Like being the guys that made money wasn't a bad thing. And it was, like I said, I pitched myself because you may remember this. When I first moved to Los Angeles, our offices were in Burbank. So not that I had a great, huge office, but my office window looked down at the Batman set on the Warner Brothers lot. So I'm like, Jesus, I had to pinch myself. This is unbelievable. But it was great training, and it got me in the door to lead to other things. But I felt like I had nothing to lose, and I always wanted to live in California, so it all
Who
worked out.
who was the toughest station that you had to pitch to?
Kevin O'Brien, KTVU in San Francisco. I don't even have to think about that. And it was tough because he was the dominant station. It was tough because he was the most, he knew his stuff. He really knew his stuff. And the other thing was, we wanted to be with him because he was a winner. I mean, his station worked. So our shows became more valuable by being on his station. And he was a relationship guy. He was a character likes of which we don't see anymore in the business. But he knew his stuff. And I always used to say this when I had meetings with Les Moonves the same way. Like I wore my best suit, I wore my best tie, my hair was combed, and I was ready because they would ask good questions and they knew their stuff, and you wanted to be on their team. So,
And I guess syndication was probably to some extent part of the engine room of Columbia TriStar's TV business in the 90s. And that included Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune.
right.
And so, just to be a bit topical, Columbia did produce them but didn't distribute them.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever try to bring them back in the fold at that time?
Um, it's a good question, and I'm really not. Well, I'll just say it this way: King World, they had their distribution deal well before Columbia got involved. So then CBS bought King World. So then it was under the CBS leadership. The thing with Wheel of Fortune Jeopardy is everybody was making money. I mean, it wouldn't have been in my best interest, or it wouldn't have been in the company's best interest, meaning Sony, to get into a battle with Les Moonves and CBS, try to pull Wheel of Fortune Jeopardy back and they take the distribution back. Look, Roger King at the time, I think, was one of the great. He is the Babe Ruth of syndication, figuratively and like he was that guy. He was the guy in real life. He was a larger than life character, but he was unbelievable. So, and most of my time was spent with Roger, and that. And he did a great job. And like I said, everybody was making money. There was no reason to destroy the relationship with CBS to try to be greedy. Times change. I can't speak to what's going on now, really, but it's just unfortunate to me that such a great relationship over the years turned sour. And I don't even know if there's anyone to blame. It is what it is. It's too bad.
So the 1990s, alongside syndication, were a golden age for the Columbia TriStar Sony Pictures Television's scripted operation, with a lineup that helped to define US TV in that era. So network comedies like Seinfeld, you mentioned Married with Children, Mad About You, Just Shoot Me. There was Larry Sanders on HBO and teen dramas, Party of Five, Dawson's Creek. But by 2001, the division seemed to be in crisis, and Sony head Howard Stringer reshaped the TV business and put you in charge of the new operation.
Mm-hmm.
What were your top three priorities when you took over?
I think you have to take a step back and look at why they went from where they were to how they got to the place they were in 2001. So the big issue was back in the heyday, networks couldn't own programming. So when that changed, it changed the dynamic. So at the time when the networks couldn't be involved in ownership, Sony was doing 25 pilots a year because they could. So Warner Brothers and Columbia, TriStar, whatever, they could, they were in a great position because networks needed to use outside studios for their programming. Once that changed, it changed everything. And I think what ended up happening is that studios were doing more of their own business or doing business with themselves, and everything else was a co-production. And what happened was, I don't want to say Sony didn't adjust the time, but they kept going down this road where they're making 25 pilots, and the networks weren't picking up the same number of pilot or going to series with the same number. And there were multiple TV divisions. There was a TriStar division. There was a Columbia Pictures Network division. At the time, I oversaw the syndication business, but also the cable production business. So there was a lot of bodies doing finance and legal and business affairs and those things. The world changed, and they didn't change with it. Was bottom line. So when Howard, by the way, publicly shut down the business and said, "Okay, go fix it," it was tricky because one, I had to combine all the different TV businesses under one roof. So when you look at that, it's business affairs, it's legal, it's finance, it's marketing, it's all those things. So that was painful because I think we ended up we reduced our headcount by about 35% at the time. So that was difficult. Combined all the different units under one roof. So that was that. So the difficult part was doing that, understanding what Howard really meant was it's got to change. He wasn't really shutting it down, but there was this thought that he was shutting it down. But, working with agents and writers and talent and saying, oh, no, we're still in business. So what you see over here in terms of layoffs and we're shutting it, ignore that. So this juggling act of saying, we're still in business, but we need to do it differently. And we had to do it differently. So that what that meant was really thinking about where the proper place, the appropriate place was to put our money and our investments. And at the time, like I said, it went from having all these overall non-rank producer deals, which we had to unload, and having these network shows, we had big deficits, and rethinking it. So our timing was great because at the time, basic cable channels were, just starting to do original programming. And as I mentioned to you earlier, they were doing fewer episodes, but they were doing it at a lower price point, and they were more aggressive, in terms of, paying higher percentage of license fees. That's so to speak. So I think in terms of priorities, we shifted away from really being top heavy in broadcast network and really looking at the cable business because no one else was really getting into it. We thought there was an opportunity. So we ended up doing The Shield with Fox and FX, which turned out to be a really nice piece of business and a big hit. Did Rescue Me, damn. I mean, so I get the goal was really, how can we become a leader in that world? And it was tough, as I mentioned to you earlier. There was, I don't want to say resistance, but we had to figure out how to sell it internationally and really understand how it would work in the syndication market, because when you're doing fewer episodes, you're accumulating less episodes for syndication. So anyway, we had to figure all that out. So to get back to your original question, I think one was figure out, the priorities were like, in what area can we allocate our resources to really make an impact on the business? And I think we really leaned in hard on creating original programming for basic cable networks and use that as kind of a jump off point to kind of come back and do the business. So there was that. Secondly, really kind of refocusing the efforts of the team, in terms of we're not going to be as big a player in the broadcast space, but this is how we can make an impact. So it was kind of pivoting the mindset of the team itself and really making sure, because you can imagine when you have those kinds of layoffs, really affects morale, obviously. And all I can tell you is that was a lot of work. And I remember it was like every time there was a minor victory, we celebrated because we wanted people to feel like, okay, we're making progress. And by the way, the other thing was, and this, it was convincing, the international sales team, as much as building the morale in Los Angeles, it was making everybody around the world feel really good about the fact that we're going to be in this business. We're just going to do it a little differently for a while and getting the buy-in there. And that was hard because, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, some of the output deals around the world didn't really take into consideration basic cable deals. So there was a lot of work to be done to make it all fit in terms of business model, morale, the whole thing. And then the other thing was like convincing the outside world, like we were serious about the production business and that the world was changing. That wasn't easy because talent deals were different and showrunner deals were different. And like, it was just, we were going down this path of really trying to reinvent Sony's TV business, but at the same time, kind of adjusting to where the world was going because, it was changing and we were front and center in that. And I think once we started getting some shows that started working, and when The Shield, I'll never forget when The Shield won an Emmy Award, and that was a big deal. And then Rescue Me, and then and obviously Breaking Bad. And it just led us down a path where, we were able to really be pioneers in some ways in terms of creating original scripted programming for basic cable networks. So it was fun. I wish I enjoyed it at the time, because at the time it was like brutally hard. But looking back on it, I think it was luck and timing really made it all work for us. The one thing I will say, because I've talked to Sir Howard about this, and he always would say, like, I didn't close the TV business down. I just didn't like the way it was being run. He was 1,000. By the way, sometimes you just got to go scorched earth to get something done the way. And I know, I saw it firsthand, him trying to get his message across. We had to do things differently, and a lot of people weren't listening. And so he did what he had to do to get the result he got, and he was right. So it was certainly characterized as shutting a TV business down. But what he meant, what was said was, we had to adjust because the world was changing, and there were more opportunities, and we were focused on just one, and we were just it just wasn't being run properly. And he knew, I think, that it would require, just different thinking because I didn't come up to the traditional path of development or traditional path of someone to run a studio. I came out of the buyer side, the station side. But what that allowed me to do was ask questions and question how things were done in a way that I think someone who came up to the traditional way of development wouldn't have thought to ask. And so, in some respects, I think that was a smart move on his part. I certainly benefited from that. And it was a lot of dark, difficult days, but in the end, very, very much worth it. But I have to give Howard credit. He really saw that if we had to do something, like we had to make a hard turn because you couldn't when the networks were when they could own programming and they were going to do their pilots and they were going to have their overall deal. It was crazy to think we should as an independent studio that we should be doing 23, 25 pilots or whatever the number was. It's crazy. And, it had to be shook up in a way that it was. And I give him a ton of credit because it was a ballsy move. And in the end, it worked out. It worked out. And to the point where, being a strong independent, I also remember back, I'm trying to think if Howard was there. I don't think he was. Maybe he was. But when Dan Loeb was looking at looking at Sony, and up until that point, people were saying to us, "Oh, you can't survive unless you've got a network, and you have to have a network." And we did this investor conference. People saw that we were, I think, in business with like 18 networks. And the comment was, this is the value of being independent. You can be in business with everybody. And you're Switzerland and, you're not aligned with one person. That's actually, if done properly, is a good way of going about it.
In 2001, I think, Sony Pictures Television produced a pilot for a TV series called Bad News, Mr. Swanson. Notable for an early acting appearance by Taylor Sheridan and its subject matter of a teacher, played by Frank Whaley, who receives a diagnosis of cancer. The pilot was initially picked up, but it never made it to air. But clearly, Sony never gave up on its dream of getting a show about cancer on the air and did so with Showtime's 2010 series, The Big C. But of course, Breaking Bad would explore the topic and many others in a very profound way with its launch in 2008. At what point did the script for Breaking Bad come your way? And can you talk about the show's journey from pitch to becoming the studio's second most profitable property behind Spider-Man?
Gosh, I forgot about those shows you mentioned back in the day. I got to go back and do a little homework and trying to understand why they get picked up. Look, you mentioned that book earlier. This was documented in the book. When we originally did, we went in for the green light meeting for Breaking Bad. I remember it was Zach and Jamie and me and our CFO of finance. And, when you do these green light meetings, it's like a one pager and it's got a log line and the P&L for, I think this was like year one and he had 4 years. But anyway, the long story short, when we pitched the corporate team, the idea that was, it was like, okay, what? Guy with cancer, crystal meth, how's that work?
But what about when you first read it? I'm really interested. What was your initial reaction?
I was neither fish nor fowl. I was like, okay, sounds interesting. My big question initially was how do you do a show? I was less concerned about the crystal meth and more how do you take a show out over multiple seasons when someone's got terminal cancer or dying of cancer and maintain credibility. So that was my biggest issue. And the interesting thing about Breaking Bad could be a case study for like a lot of things, but I think just quickly, and rightly so, by the way, the senior management at Sony, when I did I went to my bosses, the head of finance for the studio and talked to them about the show. How do you not skeptical of that? We didn't know it was going to turn out the way it was. But what we did know is we desperately needed a hit. I mean, there was no question at the time. Like we had some like mediocre, like I said, The Shield, and they were all great, but we needed the breakout show. So, and who knew? We didn't know. And certainly, at the time, AMC wasn't doing original programming, and we knew they were doing something before us, which turned out to be Mad Men. So we got lucky from that in that regard because they kind of laid the groundwork. Bryan Cranston, great actor, but coming off of Malcolm in the Middle and some things. Vince Gilligan wasn't worked on X-Files and the movie Hancock and left that. Shooting in Albuquerque. I mean, it wasn't like the wind was in our sails. Like, oh, this is a slam dunk. So there was that. Then it didn't exactly have a hot start, and there was some conversation about AMC really wanted to cancel the show after season 2. And the irony of that discussion was part of the ability of them to continue with it. We reduced the license fee, but in exchange, we got syndication rights back early. So when it went on Netflix, I mean, this will never happen again because the way the rights all work. But by going on Netflix, people found out about the show, because they heard about it, whatever. Well, after it aired on Netflix, the original seasons going forward with AMC just spiked. It was like a hockey stick. So in this particular case, Netflix was additive to the building of the Breaking Bad brand and series, which, again, the way the rights work, they'll never happen, but it was a moment in time. But who knew? You never know. I mean, you just never know.
Prior to taking over responsibility for Sony Pictures Television International in 2009, how aware were you of the international TV side of the Sony Pictures Television business with its 3 pillars of distribution, channels, and local production, and the world of MIPCOM? I mean, did you remember your first MIPCOM and
Sure.
how it
So,
compared to the US?
yeah, no, well, I guess first of all, I was always aware of the international business because when you run a domestic TV business, half your revenues, I think, whatever, let's assume half, come from international. So you can't greenlight a domestic TV show unless in the day, unless you understand how it's going to sell international. So from that standpoint, while I wasn't overseeing it, there was a great team there, obviously, and we relied on those sales to really give us the ability to produce these shows in the United States. So I was always aware of it, and I had actually gone to MIPCOM prior to overseeing international sales. The funny story is, I'll never forget. I mean, for better or for worse, I'm a little bit go personality, and in the United States, when you go to like Nappy, for example, you get people in a booth and it's a wrestling match. Either they want to buy your show, and they're trying to convince you like they got to have it, even though you have other options, or you're begging them to buy your show. So when people go to Nappy, it's like, okay, I'm going to Nappy, I'm going to buy shows. I'm going in with a checkbook, I'm leaving with shows. And that's the buyer's perspective. And from a sales perspective, I mean, every day we had a post-mortem. Okay, what did we sell today? And we go around the table. And you better have sold something for that meeting, right? What took me, I admit I wasn't good at this early on. I didn't understand the drinking coffee, sipping wine, smoking cigarettes on the balcony of what was that place called? Why am I drawing a blank?
Palais, the
The
Palais.
Palais, right? Like I, I had Michael Grindon like calm me down because he said, you got to understand, this is how it works internationally. And I said, I don't get it. He goes, well, you got to take him to dinner. You got to this. And he was right. And I wasn't accustomed to that. And there was no going around the room at the end of the day. It was like, if you go around the room, it was like, who are you having dinner with tonight? And it's like, what bottles of wine are you buying? It's a different sell. And I think that's all changed today. It's a little bit more, I think it's more similar to US than it used to be. But yeah, it was a little bit of an adjustment because it wasn't what I was used to, frankly. And yeah, what you find out you can offend people by trying to be too much of a salesman internationally. and it didn't take me long to adjust, but it was definitely an adjustment, definitely an adjustment. And the other thing was not to be prude, but like I don't drink, I'm not a drinker, and I don't smoke cigarettes. There's a lot of that going on, like in the hall. I mean, it was I mean, I look back on it, it was like I should have enjoyed the mobile board because it was just very interesting. And there's so many unique personalities, and the buyers were different, like the levels of people you had to talk to, and there was just a lot more that went into a sale than just here's my show, here's how much it costs, are you in or are you in or you out? So I learned a lot. Didn't take me too long.
So Sony faced a bit of a turbulent time in 2015 and issues to do with the hack. And by the end of 2016, a lot of the senior management had moved around, including yourself. But you moved on to pastures new with Village Roadshow Entertainment
Mhm.
as CEO. How did you find the transition from an established studio operation like Sony Pictures to more of a startup?
Yeah. Well, here's what's really interesting. So I think Sony, I mean, we were a big company, but the TV group, if you go back to your question earlier about 2001, think about it this way. They were shutting down and reorganizing a business, which for years was like one of the top independent studios in town. So when I came in 2001, it wasn't a startup, but sure as hell felt like it. So the kind of process that I went through, separate from the layoffs, because that was, like I said, very difficult. But separate from that, like I was going around preaching, like, here's what we're going to do as a company. And it was a startup. We were a startup within a big company. And we had to gain the respect of the marketplace. We had to gain the respect of Tokyo. I had to convince our own team it was worth being part of. And I always felt like we were, I mean, even when we had huge success and had 40 shows, went from no shows to 40 and making money, I still felt like we had to prove ourselves every day. So all that training I went through, early days of running the Sony TV business, were good training for Village Roadshow, because Village Roadshow had a 25-year plus history of being a film financer and they weren't in the production business. Now, the unfortunate thing from that standpoint was a year into it, COVID hit. So it was, look, it was a great experience, but between COVID, the writer's strike, the lawsuit that they're involved in with the Matrix, and the business pivoting in terms of what it was like, I always said to my team, I said, look, now fast forwarding to the Sony hack. The Sony hack was a great training for dealing with the COVID stuff, because it's like different but the same from the standpoint, okay, eventually this is going to come to an end and we got to keep doing business. So there's that. I will say that a lot of people have a struggle with going from a studio job to an entrepreneurial job, because they think they're a lesser executive, which I completely disagree with. I'll get back to that. Secondly, they miss all the perks. So, okay, you're taking Uber and not a car service, or you're turning the coffee pot on in the morning and it's not your. I mean, like, stupid things which shouldn't matter, due to a lot of people. They think, like I said, they're lesser. I would argue if you're an entrepreneur, and God knows, since I've left Village Roadshow, it's weird, I've met so many more people that I respect so much, because you have to be smarter and work harder sometimes. I'm not categorizing, but if you're running your own business, you're a jack of all trades and you're doing a lot of different things. Whereas if you're in a studio, you have a parking space, you have a really nice office, you have a couple of assistants, maybe, or one, you have a dining room. Like, it's a nice life. And you have a lot of people supporting you. So, I went to, I first went to Village Roadshow. It's like, I show up the first day, like there's not that many employees. So I turned the coffee pot on, and we were starting to do pitches. We got to make a deck. Well, you got to make a deck. So you're really using all your skills, but there's so much more. It's so rewarding when you're in the position in so many ways, when you're doing your own thing like that. But it's hard for a lot of people. A lot of people struggle with the perception, which is again stupid that they would think that, but the fact that they maybe have to do things they really weren't accustomed to doing when they worked at the big studio. But and look, it's at this part of my life and having done what I've done, it's exactly what I want to be doing. When you're a little older, you're not really as welcome in the bigger studios because whatever, and for all the right reasons. But when you're a little older, when you're dealing with investors, that they want that experience, they want the people who've been through, the kind of been punched in the gut a couple times and got up the campus, and so having gone through the hack and rebuilding a TV business and having multiple experiences in station business and studio business, those all work in your favor. So it's understanding what lane you should be in at your given age and figuring out how that'll make you happy.
Your former colleague, Peter Schlessel, said on this podcast that one of the things you did was embrace what his team were attempting to do on their side at Sony Pictures, particularly with their acquisition strategy around movies. What makes a successful executive in Hollywood? How do you balance that collaboration with the individual drive?
That's a really good question. I think it's funny, it's a fine line between running a siloed business and being protective of your team. In other words, I think part of what I did to motivate the team was talk about us being the underdog because, we were building this company up and, they shut it down and no one thought we could make it. And so you build this thing about everybody, like this world of like, we got to have a chip on our shoulder. Everybody's out to get us and we're going to show them. And so you can fight the fight. So you're motivated to fight the fight. At the same time, you got to be collaborative with the feature group or international, or like you do have to work as a team. And I will say, I sometimes I was overly protective of making sure our team was taken care of. People would feel like we were siloed and I was, putting a wall around the business. I never thought I was, but maybe in some ways I could say it could be viewed that way. But in terms of like working with Peter, I mean, I think we collaborated a lot because they relied on us to generate the revenue, as you know, post the home entertainment window. Like we were responsible for generating that revenue, big chunk of the revenue. So it forced us to be collaborative. And but it's hard, because depending on how you're compensated, who you worry about the most. But of course, I mean, here's the thing. I'm watching this Donald Trump, Elon Musk fight on TV today. And someone tried to characterize it as two brothers fighting for, everyone's attention. It's just in the normal course of business, you're going to have some head knocking inside any business, and it's healthy. But once you get outside your doors, you got to be on the same team. And I think we all did a pretty good job of that because we didn't always agree on things. And yeah, the TV guys always felt that the film team got more attention. So that's true around town. It's not going to change. But in the end, like I think, look, I love saying I work for Sony, but more importantly, I love the people I've really worked with. To me, that was the most important thing. Sony is a logo and it's a company, and I felt proud to be part of a big international company. But like I said, I felt more proud of the team that I was part of and what we accomplished over the years, despite, some obstacles and those things.
So finally, if one of the local stations, let's say in Baltimore, could be Philadelphia, chose to celebrate the career of Steve Mosko with a dedicated night of programming, which 3 shows that you've been associated with would you choose for that schedule?
Well, look, it's like, when someone goes to the podium, they win an Oscar and they start thanking people and they go, why didn't you thank me? It's like, well, I only had, or it's like, you don't pick your favorite kid. Without disparaging anything I've been involved with in my career, look, I think Breaking Bad that speaks for itself. I mean, it broke ground. It creatively was just beyond belief. I mean, kudos to Vince Gilligan and everyone associated, Brian and everyone associated with that. That would certainly have to be one of them. Seinfeld. I mean, doesn't get much better than that in the comedy side, although we did a lot of great comedies. But, I would put it a slash next to that saying, and comedians and cars getting coffee, because when Jerry decided to do something else, and this is what we talked about, and he wanted to do it. The idea was to fly under the radar, and his words, people discover it, and and it's such a simple premise, much like Seinfeld's a show about nothing. Kind of comedians and cars was just Jerry driving a nice car, interviewing stand-up comedians primarily. And that broke ground, I would say, on the digital side, because it wasn't an expensive show to do. And it was interesting, So it was, short form and the 15-minute version of short form. And I'd have to say Shark Tank. So we've gone from drama to comedy and unscripted. And that story alone, we didn't have unscripted show on the air. I called Mark Burnett, said, give me 15 minutes. Brought my book of formats of Steve Kent that put together over the years, and Paul Gilbert and those folks. Said to Mark, look, I literally got on one knee and said, I need to be in business with you. I don't need to make money. I shouldn't have said that to him, but I said, I just need to say I'm in business with Mark Burnett to give me some credibility here in the unscripted spot. And he goes, I'll give you let me look out Clay tomorrow. And it was, as you know, is Dragon's Den, which he said dragons won't work in the United States. And so I'm seeing sharks and blah, blah, blah. And one thing led to another, and Shark Tank occurred. And if my memory serves me correctly, Shark Tank wasn't a big hit initially. There were lots of gyrations that went through. But I think when Mark Cuban came on board, it kind of took off because he raised the bar in terms of putting money on the table. But here's what's crazy. I just named 3 shows that both were not immediate hits. Like Seinfeld was almost canceled, thanks to Rick Ludwin, who ran, it was an NBC. He put his budget from, I think, late night to save Seinfeld. Breaking Bad was an immediate hit. And Shark Tank was an immediate hit. This is not a criticism of the world we're in today, but I guess it speaks to it. I don't know if those 3 shows would have survived in today's world, because we're in the world of like instant success, and some things just take time. And thank God, because I know so many people. I remember Bob Iger talking to me about how he sat with his son and watched it because it was a learning experience of watching Shark Tank. And like I said, like some of these things just require patience. And I always wonder what we've lost in the world of shows today, that the algorithms weren't polite and they got pulled. So anyway, like I said, I hate to single out individual shows, but those 3 are certainly ones. And I have to say Shark, and I in fairness, the obvious choice would have been Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, but I viewed myself as a caretaker to those shows, and Harry Freeman and his genius. So I put those off to the side as like chairman emeritus kind of shows. Of course, they're your favorites, but in terms of like, that's why I did the comedians and cars, because I kind of came on board with Seinfeld. Like, we were distributors only on that. So, but yeah. Hey, look, I know we're wrapping up. I feel very lucky that in my career I've been part of like a couple of the greatest shows in the history of TV, and the unscripted side, Wheel and Jeopardy, to experience Breaking Bad, to experience Seinfeld, and many other things. I mean, just to be at the forefront of getting into the basic cable business. And we're House of Cards. We had the international distribution on that. To be involved in The Crown, which we were one of the first studios, maybe the first studio to really do original programming for Netflix. So, getting involved in basic cable early on, working with the streamers early on, just being, doing things with, just being like thinking a little bit outside the box and not just focusing on traditional broadcast TV, I think was our strong suit. And having said that, help me out here. I'm drawing a blank on our NBC show with James Spader.
Blacklist.
That was the only show, I think the only show in my years at Sony where when the script was done and the pilot was done, everybody said this show is getting picked up and it's going to be a big hit, and it was. And like that was for all the right reasons. Like that was, and that pilot you remember was great pilot. I'm not talking about broadcast network shows going through that Michigosh. I think everybody knew the crowd was going to work and whatever. But no, that one I'll never forget. It tested great, but yeah, it was good. Hey, look, and I'll end you with. I'll give you one thought. A lot of folks my age bitch about how the business has changed, and it's not saying it's still a great business. It's a wonderful business, and there's lots of opportunity. There's lots of shelf space. Yes, it's hard to get shows picked up. Yes, the economics are different, but it sure beats the hell out of doing anything else. And when you're in the entertainment business, you're shaping culture and people's opinions of things, and it's great. It's great. Like I said, it's different, but it's great.
Well, Steve Mosko, thank you so much for being a guest on Here Comes Pod. In the world of TV, they say it's always sunny in Philadelphia. So,
Ah,
not surprisingly, I think you've proved that moving to the sun proved to be a wheel of fortune for this son of Philadelphia and Baltimore.
great. Well, thank you. It's good to see you and reconnect again. And good luck with continuing with this podcast. And I enjoyed the conversation. It requires me to go into the memory bank. I tend to be a looking forward folk or person, but sometimes it's thinking through how you got to where you got to in your career helps you go forward. So a lot of those things that help me get through, I would say, like things like getting through the transition and back in 2001, and getting through the hack and different management changes. So they all help you on your view of the world now. So it's good to look back and remind myself of that. So anyway, Danny, take care of yourself. Good seeing you.
Thanks, Steve.